Join our knowledgeable hosts as they dive into the captivating universe of comic books, movies, TV shows, and pop culture. Get ready for vibrant discussions and a shared enthusiasm for all things superhero and beyond. A comic podcast straight from the panels. This is Beyond the Capes.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Cape podcast. With us today is our returning friend, Jason Douglas. This is the first time we've actually gotten to see each other face to face because we were just on audio before. So welcome back. We got very exciting news today.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here with you.
Perfect. So our last conversation, we got into, you had a lot of short stories out. Parallel is still one of my favorites.
Good.
Yeah, that was a great story. I don't know if it will ever be topped for me. But what we're here today to discuss is Jane American, which, as we kind of talked about it last time, I know you were probably gearing up for this, so there was some leeway into, I do got some stuff in the horizon with this. Because that short story leaves a very ambiguous ending that we talked about. So what was it like? I mean, obviously, when we last talked, it was probably sometime last year.
Yeah.
So did you already have this story written?
Oh, yeah. So like, this is, I'm sure we talked about this at length last time. The idea of, me being a comics fan exponentially longer than I've been a creator. So like I came to this rather late, very successful right off the gate, which is, very rare, but like, I waited until I was over 40 before I wrote my first stuff. And so like what comes with that is every single experience that I've had, whether it's that first book and Parallel selling out and then the special edition and the Ringo nominations or my first Kickstarter and now my first graphic novel on Kickstarter, like all these experiences are the first time. And there's a lot of naive 12-year-old and 12-year-old fanboy still in me every time I do something like this. And so what that kind of results in is not necessarily knowing exactly how it's supposed to go and at different stages, right? So what tends to happen, because it's a really warm community, is somebody with a lot more experience than me, somebody with a lot more experience and maybe brains than me, steps in right before I do something that would have maybe derail something and goes, no, look, you can do it a little bit weird. You can do it a little atypical, but it's better if you do it this way. And honestly, what I had post Parallel was the story beats for the entire Jane American story, the thing that launched literally today. That 132 pages, the script wasn't written, but all the story beats for all 4 chapters were there. What changed was smarter people than me talked about how, as successful as Parallel was, the then stepping into like kickstarting something, a 132-page graphic novel would be so cost prohibitive before you had built up a fan base, before you had built up some capital, all these kind of things that I just didn't have knowledge about, that what we did first was the one shot that you were just mentioning. Yeah. So that's what we did last year. And then because this story, and we'll talk about it, but because this story is so important to me, and to get out in the world and people to experience it for its themes and for what it means to me personally, I wanted to make sure that it was affordable on several levels for people. And so something that I did that makes this Kickstarter a little bit different than maybe the ones that, a lot of listeners and watchers are used to in the past, certainly I'm used to as a backer of projects, is the goal, even though the book basically costs over $20,000, our goal is only $5,500 to get it published and in the world, because I took every single penny from that first one. And after everybody got paid, I held back and I didn't take a penny from it and just used it to defray the cost of this one. So you'll notice that. And there's like down in one of the sections on the page, if you go visit it, like you can see, I do like the pie chart breakdown. You can tell that for the last 25 years I've been a public school teacher, because like all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted, and I make sure that all the details are there. You don't need that angry parent coming back and saying, why didn't you do it this way? And I was like, well, I did. And so it's in there to kind of explain that. But like yeah, it wasn't the plan originally in my brain, but then became it just out of smarter people than me telling me it will go smoother if you do it this way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what is impressive, if for anyone that follows you on Instagram, in your area for Comic-Con visits and tables, you might be one of the busiest people that I know of in the convention circuit.
So I talked to this colleague at school today, and actually two of them, and they were both telling me how relaxing their summers were, and it just made me so tired to hear about literally all the relaxing that they did. Because you're right, like what I do with, I've got 3 teenagers that live in my house, and during the school year I've got 180 teenagers that live in my classroom, and so like that beautiful, I almost think mythical now, because I can't really remember the day where this was true for me, but that idea of free time just really doesn't exist for me. But if I sniff it even a little bit, I literally am at a convention or at a signing or at a show or at a street fair or writing something new or promoting the book. And I have literally decided to pour every single ounce of whatever that thing is that we call free time into this passion of mine. Yeah.
Yeah. And it shows. I mean, and the nice thing about it is, as we discussed previous with the single shot of Jane American, is you had a lot more leeway. Now, I mean, you're doing a feature-length graphic novel, so you can finally, which has to be somewhat freeing because you can now really delve into a story that you had the breadcrumbs for, but now you essentially have no limitation. You could tell the story completely.
Right. And that's just, I mean, I think that's something, again, being so relatively new to this particular creative process, like call it comics, okay? Because I've got a handful of years under my belt, like as a playwright before that. But so I'm like discovering a few things that I think are probably like truths about who I am as a writer. And one of them is, at least so far in the comic world, this idea of like story beat structure, okay? Of knowing the big swings and the big beats here. And as I get more experienced as a comic writer and working with scripts, I can kind of start to feel in the same way that when I was doing a lot more playwriting, I could feel that the blocking needed to be this here. This would be this many pages. This is this many minutes on stage. I'm starting to feel more naturally about like, this probably translates to about this many pages, and I need to make this shift here and do it on a page turn here and a reveal here. But you're right. It was really, really nice to be able to, when I got back into that script, and to kind of just let it breathe and make sure it went in the places that not only that I had planned for it, but you'll hear this from a lot of writers. And I was always fascinated, like when I, read about writers that I've loved for the last several decades, like when you get to let your story live the way it wants to live, when you get to let your characters do and say the things that they are going to say and do naturally anyway, whether you plan them to say it or not. And the cool thing about having like that you call it like the breadcrumb structure is it doesn't allow you necessarily to meander and wander off the path and get lost, bogged down, maybe get into a place where there's no way to get out of it. But because it's not the end all be all, it can change, and it's not every single detail. It allows new things to happen and like to be surprised, even though it's already in your head, which is a really, really cool experience.
Definitely. So for everyone listening that may not be familiar, which you can at least everyone that is listening right now, you can listen to our first episode that we'll have linked in the comments. How would you sum up what Jane American is about?
So we are talking about this 132-page World War II coming-of-age story, okay, set in downtown Plymouth, Michigan, which is where I grew up, and several generations of my family before me grew up. And during this time, during the war years, Jane, our protagonist, is living a life of family, of stability, of hope, until she's not. Until war literally brings tragedy to her doorstep and everything changes. Until she changes in unbelievable ways that are better left hidden. That's code for my comic nerds out there. You know where that's going. The economic hardships at the end of the war, though, right? Dad's not coming home. Because of societal norms, mom's no longer allowed to be a Rosie the Riveter in the factory. it's kind of left Jane with this choice. She can stay safe, she can stay hidden, or she can embrace now who she really is and what she can truly do for the sake of everybody that she loves. Okay. Now, this story is chock full of those universal and relatable themes for all ages about identity, about self-worth, about self-realization, about being you in a world that maybe tells you something different. Okay. And that's true for middle-aged people, for people who are 99 pushing 100, and it's true for teenagers especially. But this story is also deeply personal to me because it is named after, inspired by my late grandmother, who went through all those same things 80 years ago. It is very much dedicated to every kid who's gone through my classroom the last 25 years, which is quite literally the 21st century, still struggling with all those themes of, especially of identity today in the 21st century, when you're like, could we put that behind us? And then it's very much, and this is fresher and different than I think we maybe even hinted at his involvement last year, but this is very much now dedicated to my late grandfather, who just last year, probably when we were talking at the age of 99, when he realized he wasn't going to see 100, and boy, did that make him upset. He wanted that number so bad. Anyway, he made me promise that the book that contains the name and likeness of his high school sweetheart would see print. So this is me kind of fulfilling that promise to him and that promise to them. You know, like if you go back and look at that first interview when we talked about Parallel, like Parallel was also deeply personal, but that was, I mean, exercising my own demons is the wrong phrase, but it's the one that popped into my head. But like, you know, those deep relatable themes were about existential dread, about time passing and dreams deferred, right? Again, relatable to everybody probably once you hit out of your teenage years. And that was me, you know, dealing with my own midlife crisis and existential dread about time passing, and I hadn't done what I wanted to do yet. This one is deeply personal because of how much it means to me as it relates to all the other most important people in my life, right? That is family. That's why there's a lot of family names in it. And then all the students that have gone through my classroom, and it, you know, what breaks my heart to see still going on now than I know was going on then, and being able to put that in a kind of a darkened spots, but, you know, powerful and ultimately uplifting story.
Definitely. Now with this story, one of the things I always wondered, is it difficult to balance out for you? On one hand, you obviously want to include as much of your family history as possible, because this is a reflection of your family and kind of a legacy that you're putting out there to always preserve it, but also managing it with, you know, a little bit of obviously the comic inspiration, the supernatural, maybe the mystical, trying to find that balance. Was it difficult, or was it rather easy just because you kind of knew where you wanted to go?
Well, I mean, it was honestly that as a thinking point as I wrote, as a thing like, you know how stand-up comedians sometimes need to be careful because when they talk about their personal lives, maybe there's somebody in their personal life who, or somebody who's writing like a straight up memoir, like sometimes puts it in front of the family member to say, are you okay that I'm telling this story? This one, Parallel, was more of that than this.
Yeah.
Parallel, while not being autobiographical, there are, you know, I mean, there's, you know, my wife read it and said, oh God, that's not supposed to be me, is it? Because there's, you know, there's some negative connotations that kind of get redeemed at the end, but, you know, and that being contemporary, and that obviously, you know, certain thematic things that, you know, all people struggle with, including me, being in there, was actually a touchier version of that than this. Because, you know, a lot of the family history in here is pretty benign and pretty, you know, naming characters after people, right? And a lot of those people are also gone. And a lot of it is, you know, 80 years in the past, 90 years in the past. I mean, there's some pretty cool stuff in there, like in some of the names. And I think one of the other kind of universal truths that I've discovered about myself as a writer is, and you kind of led me to this really nicely, is I truly think, I believe that if I'm going to ask you as a reader to suspend your disbelief on, you know, in Parallel, there's another Landon offering that second chance. In Jane American, we've got this teenager who can lift a couple tons of steel above her head. If I'm going to ask you to set that aside, everything else is going to be as close to heavily research reality as I can get.
Yeah.
I'm enough of a pedantic nerd myself with, continuity in the comics that I love, much less in the history that I read, that it would totally ruin my day if 99 people were like, this is the greatest story I've ever read. And then one person was like, that stove was from 1954. I'm like, oh, no. Like I heavily researched there is nothing in here that, as far as I'm concerned, that takes you out of it in that sense. Down to like one of the pieces of family history is this factory that a lot of this story takes place in. It's a real place in Plymouth that my grandfather and I, before he passed, got to tour right before they tore it down and turned it into like office space. And so like when you see the wall wire factory that made these Marston mats in World War II that got a war contract, like, and you see where that time clock was, that's because when we went in there and toured it, it literally had the shadow of
awesome.
where the old punch clock was from back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, like on the wall. I was like, oh, then that's where it's going to go in the thing. Down to those kind of details. And my great grandfather worked in that factory actually pre-war when he came up from Indiana on one of FDR's like work programs. So like there's all these kind of small connections, but it's not so much like, oh, when you see this conversation between character A and character B, is that going to upset one of my aunts?
Yeah.
Because it portrays my grandmother in a certain way. Nothing really on that level. But that's a really good question, because you better believe I was thinking about that, back during the parallel days.
Definitely. Now, what is interesting is, as you said, you are a teacher. You might be one of the first people that could bring your work into the classroom as well as examples. Did that also cross your mind during this process of like, man, if I do this right too, I do have a great kind of subtext point to bring up in class that could help me as a teaching aid as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, my life would have been so much less complicated over the last 5 years had we started with this book, as opposed to the book that is definitely more for adult audiences, right? Because that's just, you're trying to, you need every bit of leverage at your disposal to just get something, first of all, into creation, right? Like that, like 99% of people don't get to that point, but then like that 1%, now you got that window and suddenly you put it in the world and it falls flat or it doesn't go anywhere. So you need every bit of leverage as possible and get as many people's faces. But like that first book was not something I could even mention, right, to the students of the age that I teach, must let their parents knowing that I know bad words. Like that was never going to happen. And so there's kind of like this, it's very appropriate for the kind of readers and nerds that we are. I mean, I was literally leaving that double life with two different, like kind of like a secret identity and everything, which was, now that I look back at it, like kind of interesting, but nerve-wracking at the time. And you better believe it that's on my mind, because like one of our stretch goals, when you go check out the campaign, one of our stretch goals, and I made sure they're all reasonable because I really, really want them to come true, is like end notes and a teacher's guide at the back. Just so that in a classroom, hey, you can take all of these historical references and kind of talking points from the book, and you can turn it into a lesson in this way and that way and that way. And I was very much inspired by the back matter in, if you're familiar with Greg Pak's book, Magneto Testament, which is a Magneto origin story, which is just a real powerful piece of work that does not rely on superpowers that much. Neither is mine. And the back matter, and that's really, really good. And honestly, as much as I like the teacher's guide at the back, I think mine's going to be better because it was written by a teacher. And I'm really excited about it. And I just finished up the end notes the other day, and I love good end notes, right? And I love end notes that are in a voice that make it a little more entertaining. Like mine has got serious points in the end notes, but like if anybody out there has a copy of Parallel Special Edition, they know how I feel about back matter. I mean, everybody out there who reads comics ever in a trade paperback format knows that occasionally we've all bought that comic where the back matter, even if we love the story, even if we love the creators, sometimes that back matter is just there to fluff up the page count so the price point goes up. and it's kind of like, oh, those are some nice sketches or whatever, but like you read the annotations and it's literally just like page 47 inks, and you're not actually getting any insight. And what I discovered when I curated all the back matter for Parallel Special Edition, like I had to do it all in my voice. And so it's like less of that and more just like storytelling about the weird way that the scene came about, where I wrote it, and how much, I had to like step away from a date I was on with my wife and like sat down on the corner and wrote out this because the idea came into my head, that kind of thing. And the end notes of this are kind of the same. So it's like it's historical end notes, like, hey, when they mention this right here, when they mention Tuskegee Airmen, here's what that means, and here's who they were, and here's some links to that stuff if you want to dig deeper. But there's also like the fun little, pop cultural Easter egg references, and I kind of go off on that. So I had a lot of fun writing those, and I hope we get to that stretch goal so that that's in the back of the book as well.
Definitely. I think everyone, at least everyone that listens to the show, can agree. There is a place for comic books in schools always, despite what people want to say. You read Alan Moore's Swamp Thing and you tell me that does not belong in a library, and I will argue that till.
And I've got a very, very personal connection to that, because long before I stepped, on this side of the creator table, or however you want to call it, like comics in the classroom have been a passion for me. I've been teaching middle school for this will be year 12, but for the 13 years before that, it was third graders and fourth graders. And bringing comics in my classroom at the early 2000s and then into the 10s, it changed lives. My reluctant readers, my below grade level readers who had that stigma of, I would rather read an 800-page book backwards or upside down than admit that I'm a couple grade levels below in reading. And I remember banging my head against the wall for like the first couple of years of my career, like not being able to figure it out, right? Because it's just not something that teachers had figured out. Yeah. And I realized that the answer was like in some long boxes at home. And I started bringing comics into the classroom, and then Scholastic bought Bone, and it changed everything. Yeah. And I ended up going to like Scholastic warehouse sales every year, and having to rebuy all 9 volumes of Bone because they wore them out. And it like changed everything, because especially as publishers became more and more aware of that younger audience and started making more and more things that, specifically targeted to certain grade levels and reading levels. Like you could have a 10-year-old boy who's barely at a kindergarten reading level, and you put an appropriate level comic in their hand, and there's no shame in that. And they improve and they make progress in a way that nothing else was working. The biggest challenge, and this is kind of what you're hinting at, was convincing the parents at like parent-teacher conferences that like what they were reading was literature. And I used to bust out this really, really cool study from University of North Carolina from somewhere in like the early 2000s that basically showed brainwave patterns in kids. Their control group was kids reading prose, and their experimental group was kids reading comics. And the brain was working almost twice as hard because different parts of the brain following the narrative storyline and the visual storyline. And it was like, check this out. They're actually working harder, and their brain is actually doing more calisthenic push-ups and stuff like that by reading these comics that we've brought them. And this is a good thing. So that was a lot of fun too.
Definitely. Now, what another thing that's impressive, and for anyone that hasn't checked out the Kickstarter, when you do, the amount of artwork that you got done for this is impressive. I don't know if that was the goal or you just fell in love with so many art, which is easy to do. I know for myself, I have a lot of prints. I don't know if it was one versus the other.
Well, I mean, it was a lesson learned from last time. It was a lesson learned from the one shot, to be honest with you. So our turnaround on the one shot was actually pretty good. I did that front loaded funding thing that you do when you're an indie creator, and paid for the artwork that you saw on that first Kickstarter, right? The covers and the sample art, whatever. But like, I couldn't afford the whole thing. So we were waiting for it to be funded, and then we turned Andy loose to do the art. But because that Kickstarter was so successful, and like I mentioned before, like I knew I was using that money to defray the cost of this one. I turned it loose a long time ago. And so like, I'll tell you what, so this is launch day. And I just looked at pencils on page 105, I think, just before we got on. So like, it's the turnaround is going to be literally months faster than last time, which last time was actually pretty reasonable considering I may have backed a Kickstarter or two of my day where you get the book 2 years later in the mail and you have no idea what it is because you don't remember that far past that you backed something.
Yes.
We did it in like 4 months last time. This time it's going to be closer to like 1.5 or 2 at the most. And so that was pretty exciting. And then if you go and check it out, like the covers, like superstar comic creator, writer, artist, all around wonderful human being, Cena Grace did the wraparound hardcover. And it's gorgeous. He took some inspiration from Darwin Cook and kind of that iconic look and that tricolored thing. And he's at DC right now doing best-selling Superman stuff, and he's brilliant and he's a good friend. And I'm so grateful that he did that. And then up and coming superstar Lauren Nalepa, who's an art teacher and about to have her own first graphic novel published. She did that beautiful and very colorful wraparound soft cover, which, you know what? I'm going to spoil this right now. It's the only spot. So we've got like the 5 sample pages up there, right? And we've got the 2 covers. There's something on her cover. I'm not going to say where, if it's the front or the back, but there is something on there that is a major plot spoiler / hint. And it's the only one of its kind. I'm not going to be more specific. If you go and look and do the zoom in and look close enough, you'll see something that I'm not going to be saying in any of these interviews about, and then this is going to happen, but you can maybe put 2 and 2 together and figure something out. Bit of a on-the-nose clue there for you to go discover for sure.
Awesome. Everyone, definitely take a look at those. Now, what is also interesting is you did wraparounds.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us are familiar with Kickstarters. We definitely get different covers, and it's obviously quicker to just tell the artist, I need a 8x10 cover. Don't worry, really quick. Just use, fires in the border. These 2 characters fighting. And obviously, you can get more artists. The wraparound, however, is for a collector standpoint always going to be better, especially like the slip cases and having it.
What I saw on my head, especially with the hardcover, because if you go and look at the 2 covers, and we've got like the 3D rendered view, so what it will look like on your shelf, and then we've got the spread out view of what the entire wraparound looks like sitting right there for you to look at. What was in my head when I was thinking about the hardcover specifically is that really, really beautiful, clean look when you have that collector's, like the one that comes out of the slipcase or whatever, where you'll notice that the soft cover, even though it is a wraparound, we still have our blurb on the back, right? But that look where it wraps around, and maybe you got your little price point down on the bottom, which ours has, but it doesn't have any blurbs, it doesn't have any synopsis on the back. It's just that really beautiful connecting piece of art, and that's something that always has been something that I like. When something looks good on the shelf, great. When something looks good to look at, better. When it does that magical thing where it just comes together and it's art in and of itself as less than even product, right? That's always something I've really appreciated, and I wanted to do that. And then I wanted to point this out too. So this is something else I did. This is much more recent. So honest to goodness, from day one, from last year, the plan was to make sure this campaign was achievable and affordable in a way for anybody who wants a book to be able to get it. That's why it's 4 times less than what the book actually costs to produce. Okay. That's been the plan since day one. What happened much more recently, almost as a result of going through my first Kickstarter last year. And I got to be careful how I say this, because this is not me throwing shade at how we use Kickstarters, especially for floppies, but like there was something that just, I have this internal conflict at all times because I'm 50% just, I want to read,
of course,
the good stories, but I'm also 50% collector. Okay. And I hunt my keys, and I hunt my runs, and I hunt my fancy covers, and I'm a child of the 90s. So you give me that shiny chromium or die cut, and Wolverine's claws have ripped through it. Like I'm drooling. Okay. And that's like this for decades inside me. But when I did it myself, half of me last year, when we had that fancy chromium cover soft touch laminate that looks old and feels old, and like those are a much higher price point than what a floppy would be on the shelf. Floppy on the shelf, 32 page one shot is going to be, I mean, $5.99, $6.99, right?
Yeah.
And yet here we've got these $20 covers and these $35 covers and these $50 covers. And while the collector in me was like, that's a really cool cover, and I would probably pay for that. And a lot of people did, and people are collecting it. And some of them got slabbed. And we saw some on eBay the other day, and we're like, oh my God, what that was going for. The reader in me was like, if there's just a non-Kickstarter exclusive version, this is, like a $6-7 book. And so what we did with this hardcover and softcover is they are the exact same price point as they will be when they're on bookshelves and in bookstores and in libraries, right? So, you get an exclusive Kickstarter softcover wraparound. I mean, that's going to be like $40 or $50. You get an exclusive hardcover wraparound, it's $80 to $100. Ours are just $20 and $40. The exact same price as they would. In fact, honestly, with that soft cover, $19.99, 132 pages plus back matter is probably closer to a $25 book, but ours is $20 on the button, and our hardcover is only $40 because, again, it's so important to me personally, but also just like messaging to like, I want people to read this. Now, you're right. Those covers are really, really cool, and they have that collectible vibe to them. And if that's your thing, great. But the reader in me won out as far as the pricing went for this project. However, I'm going to actually show everybody this here, but you can go to the page and you can see it. Maybe the collector had the last laugh though, because what I did for my collector friends is, you'll notice, and you'll scroll down on the main page, there is a giveaway attached to this campaign. Okay.
Yes.
And it's not, it's literally, you back this project at any level, you are entered to win what I'm about to show you. Okay. For my collector nerds. And then obviously at the different levels, get different levels of votes. It's all laid out there. But I have in my possession right here, I think CGC's only got 4 of them on record. And this is by far the highest grade. And we saw a 9.6 go on eBay last year for multiple hundreds of dollars. And I will be giving away this almost one of one. I got to get a good angle there. So this is my personal copy of the Donnie Darko homage foil variant of the original pressing of Parallel from State of Comics. They made 100 of these. It sold out in 8 minutes. And like I said, we've seen them online. This was the one that was gifted to me, and this is going to be somebody's at the end of the campaign. So for my collectors out there, I threw a little red meat. I threw a little chum into the water. So that right there is to be won by somebody. I'm really excited to give that away.
Yeah, for those that aren't familiar, if you pledge for number one, if you don't know what CGC is, that's the major grading force in all comics. 9.8 is pretty much a perfect score. You might be like, well, is it a 10? We saw what happened with 10s with the Miles Morales scandal.
And like how often? I mean, because this is, it's square bound, and I don't know how many 10s are even out there in anything that's like square bound. But 9.8 is still really, really good news in the collector market for sure. Yeah,
that's an awesome giveaway. Even the enamel pens, as I was going through the Kickstarter, are very fun. Thank
you for being here. Look at me forgetting all the things that I invented for my own campaign. Yeah, hand-painted enamel pens. I kind of delved into that, and my friend Dave Herndon put that together, and they're really, really nice. I've taken to wearing a bunch of pins at conventions that I'm a guest at. And like, I love watching people's eyes, as we're like interacting, or I'm giving them a pitch on something, but I like watching them drift down to see what I'm wearing. And I like to make them a little bit, not obscure, but like, if I'm wearing something, I want it to be a bit more symbolic and like, hey, is that what I think it is? And so I'm really looking forward to having one of those Jane American ones on me, going forward later this year, in fact.
Yeah, I think pins, we can all agree. I gotta see if I have my badge here. I always like to give patients something to look at, but yes, I also with my Cobra Commander.
I can't even believe I'm not wearing them on my lanyards. Oh my God, look at you. I'm learning stuff. I'm pinning in my shirt. It's like pulling it down. I'm a guest at convention. I look like a slob. You're right. I should be putting on a lanyard. That's very smart. Thank you very much for the idea. I will steal that if that's okay with you.
It's all yours. Now obviously we have a lot of story, a lot of stuff with this Kickstarter, but at the end of the day, when someone gets this book in their hands, what is the ultimate takeaway you really want everyone to take away from the story?
So when I went through the huge roller coaster of getting Parallel out in the world, and how weird it was that a publisher bought it right away, and how it dropped into lockdown and completely flopped, and then I went off and did, because I didn't know better, I did 75 interviews, and then suddenly it picked up steam. It sold out. SourcePoint Press had to go back and buy back copies from their stores that they had sent it to meet the online demand. It gets Best Writer and Best Single Issue or Story nominations for Ringo. I get to go out there to the award show, blah, 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 all that stuff. As magical as that all was for like the 12 to 15-year-old me to have that dream finally come true, the most satisfying part of that process was every time I was on a show or somebody shot me a DM on Instagram or came to see me at a convention or something and said, "Hey, I read your book and I was in a place, maybe a dark place, and like I read that book and I felt less alone. I went and talked to somebody." Because that's one of kind of the core messages about that, about like making that connection with other people. Because we all go through that, for most of us is depression and dread and anxiety when that existential dread about time passing kicks in. And whenever that was the reaction, that meant more to me than any other stuff that came with that process. And with this one, I don't care if you read it and you're 75. I don't care if you read it and you're 15. I think if one person comes away with it and feels less isolated, a little more comfortable with being themselves, I couldn't ask for anything more than that.
Yeah, no, I think a message being told through your stories, I think, is really the best gift. Even if it's a story like that lives on and everyone talks about it. I mean, I think Civil War and the discussions you can have on it's more than just Iron Man versus Captain America. I mean, it's what's happening in society today still, and it really teaches and people take stuff away. So this, especially given the younger generation and what they're going through, this is, I mean, they're always looking for something to help with what's going on.
I think it's more evidence of what I love about comics so much, and why I truly believe that comics are the most malleable medium. I mean, on a practical level, they do all this stuff that prose does and a bunch of stuff prose can't. All this stuff that film can do, but a bunch of stuff film can't. But I think on a storytelling level, especially indie comics, where there isn't, 80 years of editorial mandate telling you what you can and cannot do with your characters. I think the storytelling freedom of allowing you to have that balance. It's the exact same thing as me as a collector, right? It's this 50-50 split between, I think another truth that I've discovered about me as a comics writer is I want my story to be relatable to as many people as possible. I want to get some universal truth that you can lock into and get into and feel less alone by diving into. But at the same time, the exact other half is embracing what that comics medium does so well, which is genre. And, so like, is Parallel really about, dread about time passing and those crises that we all go through? Sure it is. Is it also a dark sci-fi twisted tale? You better believe it is. Is Jane American really, really about identity and self-worth and self-fulfillment and being you in a world that tells you something different? You better believe it is. Is it also about a teenage girl that can lift a bunch of stuff above her head and run faster than the rest of us? You better believe it's that too. And I think there's a lot of other mediums that stories go out into. And if you try to balance too much those two things and not really lean into one or the other, like go really, really pulpy and really, really campy or go ultra serious. I think that balance, it doesn't get treated with as much respect or reaches large of an audience or thought of as something that can do the things that both those two things can do, which is entertain and connect and maybe even teach.
Definitely. No, I think we can agree on that. And it's funny you say about like what movies and shows can't do, because who was I talking to? Jason Fabik, before he started making Rook for Ghost Machine, he said,
Yeah.
I want to make a comic that Netflix has to look at and realizes that every episode is going to cost them $200 million because I can.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of it. He said, like, I'm only bound by my only set of rules is what Geoff writes for their dialogue. He's like, that's really my only parameters is, all right, well, he said this guy shoots this guy, so I do have to include that. Yeah. But I can go sky's the limit with my page and the world that I build behind it and what colors. There's not like, all right, you got 10 cents per page, make it count. Don't erase that.
Right.
That is definitely the beauty of comics. One final question before we get all the information on where everyone can find this, what our time frame is we know this Kickstarter is going to do well. We're not even going to say if it does well, because I know for a fact it's going to do well. It's going to definitely meet its mark.
Your confidence to the Kickstarter gods and the backers. There you go.
That's right. What would you like to, like, let's just say you hit goal, you even go a little bit over, you hit stretch goals. What would you like to see as the next steps from this?
There's I want to talk this into existence. I don't want to jinx it. I believe in zero superstitions. I'm afraid of all superstitions. So there is a massive dream, but there is also something that I truly believe is I have proven over the last few years can be a practical, sustainable model as well. So the first thing will be is to complete this process, get those books in people's hands, probably do another cover, do a printing of that, and do kind of what I did with the one shot, and then to a lesser degree with Parallel Special Edition, which is do what I think is actually my biggest strength that I've kind of discovered in this is taking it out to the people directly. Right.
Yeah.
As much as I love this and as exciting as campaigning is, like, I'm really, really discovering that I'm in my element, like at a show, at a convention, because of the very, very natural overlap of the classroom to there.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's nothing that prepares you for a 3-day convention of repitching the same thing a couple hundred times as trying to convince, 188th graders across 7 hours of the day that the joke they're hearing in first hour and then the joke they're hearing in 7th hour is the first time that they're hearing it, or this thing that I'm trying to make nouns be more interesting, oh, this sounds fresh and whatever. So like that repetition really, really pays off. And my belief of it doesn't matter if I'm having a bad day or not, if I'm doing my job, whether it's at a convention in front of the classroom, you shouldn't know. The focus and the attention and whatever you need comes from me. So my immediate plan would be, taking this out in the world. But the long-term super goal would be that this actually becomes an even more exclusive experience, because I would really, really, really like to shop it to,
Definitely,
Houghton Mifflin, to Scholastic. I would love it to be in libraries and schools, and for it to reach an even wider audience. And that's less like that. That's not. I know some people could probably interpret it as like something ego driven or something. I don't know if fame is the wrong word, because you know that I'm not buying into that. I've been a public school teacher for the last 25 years. Like fortune and fame was never on the radar, never in the cards. And this is not changing my opinion about that. But like the idea of something that I truly, truly believe in, message wise. And I truly, truly have this huge piece of my heart, the promise to my grandparents wise, that reaching a larger audience, that no matter how hard I work and no matter how much satisfaction I take from the level that I'm at right now, it hitting that next level, the satisfaction would come from really, really, really meeting those two things, the promise to the family and the message that I know a lot of people will be able to relate to.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say like you're trying to look for those words to describe it. And I've always come up with the perfect explanation for everyone that's read comic books. Same reason why I spend my time in surgery. Pay's not great. I miss a lot of holidays, birthdays. My biggest thing is giving people a second chance. That's what they come to the hospital for. We do it to change the world. That's what we were raised to do. That's what we're trying to do. We don't know that we're trying to do it. I don't think we even understand it until we hit like our passion for what we're doing, but that is what we're trying to do.
Right.
And I mean, that's what you're going to do when this book gets into the schools. And those stories get told.
Hey, your positivity, it's feeling I feels good. I am a natural. I've got a couple of master's degrees. One of them is in pessimism. And so hearing that from you makes me feel pretty good. Thank you.
Perfect. So for everyone listening, and this is again, everyone that's listening, this is dropping now. Everything is live. Obviously, it's the 13th. Kickstarter's live. What's our timeline on this?
So I'm actually going until September 14th. And the only reason I'm even going that long is because like I was mentioning before, it lines up with the convention I'm at. Like that closing weekend, I'll be at Monroe Comic Con, and the idea of doing the double pitch, like here's what I've got on the table, but if you're interested, here's this. So I made sure that lines up with that. So it's a couple days longer than I did last time, but get on it now because the thing that makes sometimes Kickstarter or the people who are better at this than me advise the shorter the better, because the longer you go, the more people have that complacency of, hey, I've got time, right? Because it's and then you forget, and then you don't back it, and blah 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 blah. Some of that stuff in there, the enamel pins and the hardcover specifically, are limited runs. So if that's like, when you dig into that, if those look like things that you're like, I would like to read that, or I'd like to have that on my shelf, or I'd like to pin that to my lanyard, you need to get on that now. But I'm going to run it to then, just to give people that shot, and it kind of overlaps at the start of the school year, which is smart in one way, but on my energy level, probably the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life. We'll see how that goes. You check in with me in a couple of weeks and you see if, like, instead of whatever energy I'm giving on this interview, you just see like this dude just slumped in a chair going, mistake. We'll see.
Perfect. We'll be there. We'll lift you back up. So everyone listening, the link to the Kickstarter will be in the comments. If you're watching this on YouTube, it will be there. And if you are on Instagram and you see our post or anything like that, follow the link. Get on the Kickstarter now. I know we will be getting enamel pins, as I love enamel pins. Will be in the collection. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, God, my pleasure.
Very excited for this story. It's a great story. It's personal. It tells a great message. We can't wait to see this do well. We can't wait to see you do well in the future.
Well, you know how much I value your time, and you know how much I appreciate being on here with you. It's always a blast. And this was great. And kicking off launch day with you, I couldn't have asked for a better time. You're very good at your job, and I appreciate you. And everybody, go check it out. Come follow me on Instagram at JDouglasWrites. Drop me a DM. Let me know what you think of the page. It's all kind of handcrafted by me. I did not fall for any of those spam messages from my Kickstarters out there where they send you like 50 of them saying, hey, let me help you with your thing. I'm a robot. I can make it better. And I didn't fall for any of them. This is all handcrafted by me. So let me know what you thought, and any questions you got, I will always get back to you. And hey, thanks for having me on.
All right, everyone listening, hope you had a good time. Enjoy and follow the Kickstarter link. Everyone, have a good night.